Right, so Israel is closing its own army radio because it wasn't obedient enough. That's the line. Defense Minister Israel Katz says Galei Tzahal, the IDF station, has harmed morale and dragged the army into politics. Heaven forfend. The rough translation of that basically means it stopped sounding like propaganda. Well, we can't have that, can we? Broadcasts end on the 1st of March 2026 if he gets his way. But this same week, the Knesset moved to make the so-called Jazeera Law permanent as well, the one that lets the government shut any foreign outlet without a court order. Both moves wrapped in the same excuse: national security, morale, unity, two fronts of the same information war. One silencing the soldiers, the other gagging the press. Israel calls this protecting democracy. The rest of the world calls it censorship with better paperwork. The state will control the narrative and will control the flow of information Israelis receive. The microphones aren't broken, they're just being switched off by design. Right, so Israel is shutting down its own army radio. The order comes from the eternally deranged Defense Minister Israel Katz. He says the station, Galei Tzahal, no longer serves the soldiers. He says it has become political, that it undermines morale, that it drags the army into the fight of opinion. He plans to submit a proposal to Cabinet to close it, with broadcast to end on the 1st of March 2026. The justification is written in the language of neutrality, as if Israel, when it comes to information, is ever such a thing. The intention very much sits elsewhere, of course. A government that already controls most of the country's information space now moves to close the one outlet inside the military that still manages to carry an actual debate. Army radio was founded in 1950 as a morale tool. The soldiers' link to home. Over time, it became something different, though. Civilians joined the newsroom. Journalists questioned ministers. Well, how dare they? Soldiers presented music shows that strayed into politics. The line between army and public blurred, and for decades that blur's worked out just fine. It was the sound of a conscript army talking to itself. By 2024, with the country under permanent mobilisation and dissent inside the ranks rising over the unending violence and forever war that was required to keep Netanyahu in power, that openness has become a liability to those for whom control has become everything. So Katz has called this an anomaly. He says no other democracy allows a military station to air criticism of the army. And he doesn't mean that as praise, of course. The formal wording came first through the advisory committee he created, conveniently just last month. It concluded that Galei Tzahal's news division had become too political, a news station being political. Well, can you possibly imagine such a thing? And therefore he's recommended closure because of that. His companion station, Galgalatz, the music-only channel, could stay. That was the compromise. Entertainment without scrutiny, that's just fine. When Katz announced his plan, he repeated the logic of the committee nearly word for word. He said the broadcasts harmed the war effort and morale. He said enemies might interpret them as official messages. He said the army's neutrality was at risk. He offered a solution that preserves neutrality by eliminating free speech. The reaction inside Israel, given how on the nose and obvious what this is really about, has been nothing short of predictable, though. Tal Lev Ram, the station's chief, called it a serious and unfortunate blow to freedom of the press. Well, no shit, Sherlock. The Israeli Press Council issued a statement saying only the Knesset can lawfully close the station because its existence is anchored in legislation. Katz has no such authority to do so unilaterally. He can propose, he can't abolish. If he pushes ahead without a vote, the case will end up going to the High Court. The Attorney General, Gali Baharav Miara, already warned that the review process smacks of political intervention in public broadcasting. And yet the political direction has been set. Katz has the coalition behind him, and a press environment already conditioned to treat dissent as sedition. A survey by the Israel Democracy Institute last year found 59% of Israelis opposed closing army radio. That number cuts through the official line that the station is out of step with the public, therefore. It shows the public still aware that information freedom matters, even under siege. It also shows how little that awareness now counts for anything. The government's approach to communication has moved from persuasion to management. When half the population no longer believes it controls what it hears, the answer from above is not reform, but even tighter filters. What makes Katz's move more than an internal media story, though, is the timing of it. The week he promised to shutter army radio, the Knesset advanced another law, the so-called Jazeera Law, first passed as a temporary wartime measure genocide time measure even, in April of last year, but which was really about information control again, as Al Jazeera were very much broadcasting what was actually happening in Gaza at Israel's hands, and, well, Israel couldn't have that. Couldn't stand that. You only need to look at all the journalists that have been killed in Gaza by Israeli actions to know that. But that is now being made permanent. Likud MK Ariel Kellner is sponsoring the bill. It passed its preliminary reading just yesterday, 11th of November. The amendment removes the 6-month sunset clause and the wartime restriction. It allows the government to close foreign media at any time, seize equipment and block websites, all without prior judicial approval. At a time when more journalists worldwide are demanding to be let in, Israel is placing even more barriers in the way of that. Communications Minister Shlomo Karhi said the change ensures that no enemy propaganda will operate from within Israel again. So who in Army Radio is an enemy then, therefore, given they are getting the same treatment if Katz gets his way? The alignment of language between Katz and Karhi is not a coincidence. Both cast information itself as being just another battlefield to go to war on. The first version of the Al Jazeera Law was justified as a temporary defence against hostile media during the Gaza campaign. It gave the Prime Minister and the Communications Minister joint power to shut foreign outlets in wartime. To try and censor Israeli atrocity was the truth of the matter. The permanent version converts emergency authority into routine governance, though. It means that war on information, on the truth, is here to stay. It writes censorship into peacetime law. Reports have recorded that this expansion lets closures run indefinitely, based on harm to security, foreign relations, or morale. The word morale appears again. It's become the universal solvent for rights. When morale is invoked, oversight dissolves. Opposition leader Yair Lapid told the Knesset the law allows any critical outlet to be silenced by rebranding it as a threat. The Israel Press Council called it a framework for prior restraint. The Foreign Press Association warned that no due process safeguards remains. And they're right. Judicial review now comes after the closure, not before. The outlet disappears first. The arguments come later. In practice, that means there is no argument at all, meaning just the propaganda remains. And this is how temporary powers survive. The state discovers it rather likes them. Set beside Katz's order, the pattern is exact. One law targets the external voice, the other the internal one. Together they build an information perimeter around the state. Inside that perimeter, the army speaks only through approved channels. Outside it, foreign reporters operate under threat of closure if they say the wrong thing. The truth, as that would undoubtedly be. The distance between government, military and media collapses into a single command structure. The mechanism ends up being legal, the law is rubbish, but the effect is total. Israel's been here before as well. In 2017, the then Netanyahu government, him again when he was in power before, liquidated the Israeli Broadcasting Authority and replaced it with Kan, the corporation we're used to hearing now, the government mouthpiece as it is. It was under far closer ministerial control. The justification then was the same as it is now: efficiency, depoliticization, neutrality. What disappeared were the investigative programs that challenged policy, so the precedent was clear. When politicians promise neutrality, they mean obedience, and we're seeing that repeated again now. Globally, the same playbook runs from Ankara to Budapest. Erdogan's purge of TRT journalists in 2016 was justified as keeping politics out of public service. Orban's 2010 media merger in Hungary was sold as professionalism, but in each case, non-partisan became code for aligned. Katz now joins that club too. His claim that operating a civilian radio station by the military is an anomaly with no parallel in any democratic country is actually technically true, because the rest of the world's armies don't need one. Their civilian media already carry those messages. They're allowed to. Inside Israel, army radio was never radical. It stayed within the same established consensus, but it allowed argument. And that margin of argument is what defined the democracy in the process within that radio station. Closing it's not about what was being said on air. It's about who decides what might be said next, therefore. The soldiers who once phoned in song requests will now hear only music curated for morale. The journalists who question the war's direction will be reassigned or silenced. Katz calls that restoring discipline, but really it's a government that only wants to hear itself talk. The legal fight will come, but the cultural shift has already happened. The coalition treats information control as an operational front. The Al Jazeera law turns foreign scrutiny into an act of hostility. The army radio closure will treat internal discourse the same way. Both moves claim to defend Israel's security. Both redefine security as narrative unity, though. So the result is a permanent state of emergency when it comes to communication. There's a phrase running through all the official statements, though: protect morale. It appears in Katz's order, in Karhi's defence of the censorship bill, in Netanyahu's earlier decrees against foreign outlets. Morale has become a catch-all for obedience. When a government equates disagreement with demoralisation, it's no longer about protecting soldiers, it's protecting itself from its own citizens. The shift is semantic, but it's absolute. Criticism of the war becomes betrayal. Scepticism becomes sabotage. Public reaction is still divided but muted. Surveys show majority opposition to closing the station, yet demonstrations are small. Many Israelis have grown accustomed to the idea that national security justifies everything. Others have tuned out. The press still reports the facts, but the frame of that is shrinking. Each outlet that resists is accused of aiding the enemy. Each journalist who persists does so under warning. The chilling effect is policy by other means. The legal architecture now allows it too. The Jazeera Law eliminates prior judicial oversight. Katz's decree, if implemented without legislation, will test the boundaries of ministerial power. If the High Court strikes it down, the coalition can still legislate closure later anyway. Either way, the precedent's planted. Dissent within a state broadcaster is grounds for dissolution. Foreign reporting that undermines morale is grounds for expulsion. Those definitions can stretch indefinitely. The language of security has become the language of rule. Israel's communications system is being militarized in peacetime. Information is being treated as territory to occupy. This isn't democracy. This is police state stuff. The process is administrative, not dramatic. Committees, cabinet votes, amendments, each presented as routine housekeeping. That's how democracies erode, through paperwork that no one resists until the voices are already gone. Army radio journalists have promised to fight the closure by every means. They'll petition the court. They'll appeal to public memory of what the station once represented. They will probably lose. The government can wait them out, can overrule them. There will always be another measure they can take. By March of 2026, the transmitters can be switched off without public shock. People will still have music, they just won't have argument. And what passes for news will have become less so. When Katz says this move keeps politics out of the army, he's telling the truth in his own way. Politics will be reserved for the cabinet, not the barracks. The soldiers will have playlists instead of questions. The public will have security briefings instead of debate. And the government will call that unity. The democracy does not end with a coup. It ends when a state no longer trusts its own people to hear the truth from its own microphones. And that is what this closure represents. The Al Jazeera Law cements it. The rest is maintenance. While Israel might fancy shutting down its army radio might solve some propaganda problems, another one does actually loom on the horizon now as Iran prepares to launch a Hebrew news channel and beam it straight into Israel. Private satellite feeds, as some people have, broadcasts across social media channels that Israel can't control all of. Israel can switch off microphones at a radio station, but that presents a bigger problem for them that they might not be able to contain, doesn't it? So get all the details of that story here. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content and sort of spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next one. Cheers, folks.